Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to get straight to the core of things that matter.
That's right.
You're likely here because you're curious, you want to understand more, but, efficiently.
Time is valuable.
Exactly. So today, we are plunging into the wisdom of Will Durant, specifically his work, The Pleasures of Philosophy.
Subtitled A Survey of Human Life and Destiny. It's quite the undertaking.
It really is. And this book actually started life as The Mansions of Philosophy back in 1929, then revised in 53.
Okay. So it had some time to mature. Durant really offers this sweeping look at the big questions, the ones that always get us thinking.
And Durant, well, he was amazing at making these huge ideas accessible, wasn't he?
Totally.
I mean, people might know him from The Story of Philosophy, which was massive, or The Story of Civilization, that incredible series with his wife Ariel.
Oh, yeah. Our Oriental heritage, the life of Greece, the age of faith, just monumental work. He really knew how to synthesize vast amounts of information.
He did. And that's kind of our goal today, isn't it, with this deep dive into the pleasures of philosophy.
Right. We want to pull out those key insights, the philosophical nuggets that can give you a deeper grasp of these, well, timeless questions.
And crucially, how they actually connect to your life right now.
Yes, the relevance is key.
Okay, let's dive in. Why philosophy? Why did Durant think it was so important? He argues in the intro, in chapter 1, The Lure of Philosophy. He says, our knowledge is outstripping our wisdom,
hmm
and that this is actually dangerous. Does that ring true for you, looking around today?
Oh, absolutely. It
Yeah.
feels incredibly relevant. What's really striking is Durant's emphasis on, seeing the whole picture.
Interconnectedness.
Exactly. He saw philosophy as this attempt to understand how all the pieces fit, to forge some kind of unity out of the chaos we often feel.
So tackling the really big stuff.
Yeah, the meaning of life, how we understand things, right and wrong, beauty, history, politics, religion, even, like where civilization is headed.
So it's not just mental gymnastics then. It's practical. It's about bringing order, what he called unity of mind, to our lives, maybe even a sense of dignity.
Right, and he makes this really sharp distinction between just having knowledge, collecting facts, and actually possessing wisdom.
Yeah.
He felt our culture was, and maybe still is, drowning in knowledge without real purpose,
Dangerous knowledge, he called it.
which leads to his point about ethics. He saw that traditional moral codes, often rooted in religion, were kind of weakening,
Uh-huh.
but we hadn't really developed a strong, what he called a natural ethic, based on reason and understanding human nature, to fill that gap. He worried about that instability.
You can see echoes of that today, can't you? Debates about AI ethics, gene editing, knowledge without maybe enough wisdom guiding it.
Precisely.
Now, I know some people listening might think, philosophy, who has the time?
He anticipated that.
Right. He says it doesn't demand you be some kind of poet. It asks for an imaginative construction of a world completely and knowingly lived.
I love that phrase. It's about actively understanding your life, not just letting it happen.
And seeking understanding, forgiveness, and knowing when you have enough, which is, wow, such a contrast to the constant drive for more wealth, more stuff.
It really is. And internally, he saw philosophy as a way to sort out our own contradictions, the gap between what we believe and what we actually desire or do, striving for inner harmony.
And we should remember, philosophy wasn't always stuck in universities. Durant points out its history.
It's prestige.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Figures like Parmenides, Socrates, Plato, Democritus, even political leaders like Pericles, they were doing philosophy seeking wisdom.
It wasn't just abstract logic chopping. He emphasizes the human element, this kind of creative drive, a creative consummation that pulled people towards wisdom.
So philosophy can actually illuminate what it means to be human, the possibilities of life.
And he even brings in the scientific perspective,
Mhm.
suggesting scientists might see philosophy as studying experience in relation to the whole, trying to unify knowledge.
To become, as he puts it, philosopher kings, guided by wisdom.
It's a powerful image, and it really shows the breadth he saw in philosophy, history, beauty, truth, the good life. It sets us up perfectly for the next big question.
Which has to be, what is truth? That's chapter 2. And Durant kicks it off by acknowledging how tough this is, quoting Nietzsche in Anatole France.
Yeah, he doesn't pretend it's easy. He dives right into the main ways we try to find truth. Sensation, using our senses, and reason, using our minds.
Okay, sensation first. Seems obvious, right? What we see, hear, touch, that's real. The senses are the test of truth, as he says.
Right, that's the starting point. But then, almost immediately, He highlights the problems.
The limitations.
Exactly. Our senses are relative, subjective. They depend on our biology, our position, even the tools we use like microscopes or telescopes, right?
The classic example is color, isn't it? We might see the same thing, but perceive the color slightly differently. It's personal.
Totally subjective in that sense. And this opens the path to idealism.
Ah, the idea that reality is fundamentally mental.
Sort of. The core idea he explores is that we only know things as we perceive them. The external world, if it exists independently, is only accessible through our mental world.
So maybe the world is just part of our consciousness.
That's the extreme idealist position, yeah. And it sets up this huge clash with materialism. The view that physical stuff exists out there, whether we perceive it or not. Durant maps out that fundamental conflict.
Okay, so senses are tricky. What about logic? Reason?
Logic is important, of course.
Right.
But Durant is wary of relying too heavily on what he calls invariable truths.
Why wary?
Because life is fluid, it changes. How can rigid, unchanging logical rules perfectly capture a reality that's always in flux? He expresses some suspicion there.
That makes sense. He then brings up reason versus instinct.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Instinct is the older part, the survival mechanism. It's
The
deep-seated.
people stuff.
Exactly. And reason, well, that developed much later, and Durant points out how often it conflicts with our instincts.
Like when you know you shouldn't eat that cake, but instinct takes over.
Kind of. Or reacting in anger when a calm response would be better. He shows how instinct can easily override rational thought, even when reason might lead to a better long-term outcome.
So we're not purely rational creatures then, not even close sometimes.
Not at all. And Durant even warns that reason itself can lead us wrong sometimes. It's not foolproof.
So where does that leave us in the search for truth? Is it hopeless?
No, not for Durant. The goal isn't perfection. It's about adding thinking to our lives, using reason to spot errors, to understand things better, and ultimately, hopefully, find more well-being, more happiness through understanding, even when life involves pain.
It's about integrating reason, not letting it be the sole dictator or letting instinct run wild.
Finding that balance, using reason to navigate, even if the map isn't perfectly accurate.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Chapters 3 and 4 get into metaphysics, the nature of reality itself. Matter, life, and mind, and the big one, is man a machine?
Yeah, fundamental stuff. He starts with materialism, the idea that matter, physical stuff, is the ultimate reality.
Seems pretty straightforward.
On the surface. But Durant quickly raises the criticisms. How does materialism explain consciousness, subjective experience, or just the sheer complexity and, well, aliveness of the living world?
It struggles with that.
It does. And then there's the opposite view again, idealism. Mind or consciousness is primary, matter is secondary, or maybe just an appearance within consciousness.
It's still hard to wrap your head around sometimes.
Definitely. And what's really cool is how Durant considers the science of his day. He asks, what even is matter anymore? With physics talking about energy, electrons. It's not the simple, solid stuff people used to imagine.
Does that undermine materialism if matter itself is so weird and non-solid?
That's the question he raises. It certainly complicates things.
Yeah.
And then there's the mystery of life itself. How do you get from non-living chemicals to, well, us?
The origin of life question, still a big one.
Durant outlines the materialist view. Life is just incredibly complex chemistry and physics. But then he points to consciousness, the nervous system, things that seem to emerge from that complexity but are hard to explain just by chemistry and physics.
Which brings us right back to, are we just machines? Biological robots?
The deterministic view. He lays out the arguments for mechanism. Many biological processes really do seem like complex chemical reactions. Predictable, in theory.
Why?
But then he presents the arguments against pure mechanism. Our feeling of subjective experience, having goals, intentions, the sense that we choose things, our feeling of freedom.
Where does that come from if we're just machines?
Exactly.
Ooh.
Plus, he acknowledges the huge roles of heredity and environment in shaping us. Nature and nurture are powerful.
Undeniably.
But Durant still questions if a purely mechanistic explanation can ever fully capture, say, writing a poem, or falling in love, or having a philosophical insight. He felt biology was making huge strides. He called it the age of biology. But it hadn't, and maybe couldn't, fully explain the richness of human consciousness and experience.
It leaves room for something more, perhaps.
It seems to. He leaves the question open, but leans towards the limits of pure mechanism.
Okay, let's move from the nature of reality to how we live together. Morality, chapters 5 and 6. Changing morals and morality and immorality. His observations here feel incredibly current.
They really do. A core point for him is that morality isn't fixed. It changes a lot.
Across time and cultures?
Absolutely. He gives examples of customs that might seem shocking or wrong to us now, but were perfectly normal in other times or places. It really drives home the relativity of moral.
And he digs into why they change, right? It's not random.
Not at all. He links moral shifts to big underlying factors. Economic changes are huge. Think agriculture versus industry, changes in social structures, family setups, and, importantly, the growth of knowledge itself.
How did industrialization impact morals, in his view?
He saw it as significantly loosening traditional codes, especially around the family. As people moved to cities, worked in factories, the old structures and the moral rules tied to them started to erode.
And maybe the rise of individualism played a part, too.
Definitely. More focus on the individual, less on the collective group, inevitably changes how we think about right and wrong, our obligations to each other.
Which makes defining morality itself pretty challenging in a world that's constantly shifting.
Hugely challenging. Durant offers an interesting take, though. He suggests morality is, in a way, intelligence,
Intelligence, how so?
meaning that acting morally often involves understanding the longer-term consequences of our actions, having the foresight to see how our choices affect ourselves and others, and choosing what leads to better outcomes overall.
So it's not just following rules blindly.
Right. And he also talks about a natural morality, grounded in our basic biological and social needs. Cooperation, for instance, is essential for group survival. So maybe our core moral sense comes from that evolutionary history.
But society then builds on that, right?
Re-
Creates specific codes.
Yes, society shapes and enforces those codes. But there's always that tension, isn't there?
Between what I want and what the group expects.
Exactly. Individual desire versus social morality. That's a constant dynamic.
What really struck me was his idea of needing a larger morality.
Ah, yes. Beyond just our own tribe or nation.
Because the world is becoming so interconnected. He saw this decades ago. We need ethics that work on a global scale.
It was quite prescient. Which leaves us with the big ongoing question. How do we reconstruct a moral foundation that works for this complex, modern, interconnected world? He doesn't offer easy answers, but he poses the question very powerfully.
Okay, from morality to perhaps an even more complex human experience, love. Chapters 7 and 8 look at the nature of love and the relationship between men and women.
Yeah, he really tries to dissect love, acknowledging it's not just one thing. It's biological, psychological, social, all tangled together.
Where does he start? Biology.
He does. He looks at the fundamental drive for reproduction,
Hmm.
how that shapes attraction, mating strategies.
And he brings in some interesting animal examples.
He does.
Yeah.
Like the male Bonellia worm, the tiny parasitic male. It's a bit jarring, maybe, but it illustrates the sheer variety of reproductive strategies in nature, highlighting differences between sexes at a basic biological level.
Okay, so beyond the worms.
Ah, yes. He moves on to the physiological side, puberty, hormones, physical attraction, the chemistry of it all.
But it's more than just biology and chemistry, surely.
Absolutely. He gets into the psychological aspects. Desire, yes, but also attachment, companionship, the need for connection, even love as something that helps us grow personally and spiritually.
And he points out again how love isn't universal in its expression. Different cultures, different times, they understood and showed love very differently.
Very true. Then he wades into potentially trickier territory, the war of love, as he puts it,
Meaning,
exploring perceived differences between men and women in character, in their core instincts, like racial versus individualistic versus social instincts, even in how they tend to approach things intellectually.
okay, that sounds like it could be controversial today. The whole innate differences versus cultural conditioning debate.
It is, and Durant lays out arguments related to both sides. He's reflecting the thinking of his time, but also grappling with questions we still debate intensely. Are these differences primarily biological, or are they learned, imposed by society?
He goes there.
He does, and related to that, he touches on the idea of woman in genius.
What's that about?
It's looking at why, historically, there seem to have been fewer women recognized for genius-level contributions in certain fields. He considers societal factors, lack of opportunity, education, expectations that might have limited women's ability to achieve or be recognized on that scale.
So considering the impact of social structures on potential.
Exactly. It's an early nod towards issues of structural inequality, even if framed in the language of his era.
This leads naturally into the next chapters, IX and X, focusing on the modern woman and the breakdown of marriage. He saw big changes happening.
Huge changes. He was writing in the mid-20th century. observing massive shifts in women's roles and status compared to previous generations.
What did he see as the main drivers?
Primarily industrialization, again giving women more economic independence outside the home, and the corresponding decline of the very traditional patriarchal family structure.
But he also saw challenges with this new freedom.
Yes, he acknowledged the contradictions and difficulties faced by women navigating these new roles and expectations. It wasn't all straightforward progress, it brought new tensions.
And how did all this affect marriage?
He saw marriage itself evolving, moving away from being mainly an economic or social contract towards becoming ideally a partnership based more on personal connection, emotion, companionship.
But also breaking down more often.
That's what he observed. He linked the breakdown, higher divorce rates, more instability, to things like increased individual freedom, changing expectations people brought into marriage, and ongoing economic pressures that strained relationships.
He didn't shy away from the difficulties then, the dissolution of marriage, the consequences.
No, he looked at the causes and effects, including the complexities around children when marriages end. How do you reconstruct marriage or partnership in this modern world?
And he even gets personal, doesn't he? There's a section on having babies.
Yes. It's quite touching, actually. He shares his own observations watching children develop physically, mentally, morally. He stresses the need for a mix of freedom and discipline, and underlying it all, love. It adds a really human dimension to the whole philosophical survey.
It really does. So let's try and pull this together. As we wrap up this deep dive into Durant's pleasures of philosophy, what are the big takeaways?
Well, we've seen his powerful argument for why philosophy matters, especially when knowledge grows faster than wisdom.
Right, and the difficulty, the slipperiness of defining truth, that constant dance between our senses and our reason.
Then the deep metaphysical questions. Mind versus matter, are we just machines? Durant explores the limits of purely materialistic explanations.
And morality not fixed, but changing, shaped by economics, society, knowledge, the need for maybe a broader, more global ethic.
Don't forget love, its complex nature, biological, psychological, social, and the evolving dynamics between men and women.
And finally, those huge shifts in women's roles and the subsequent changes and challenges for the institution of marriage he observed.
It's a huge range of topics, but Durant's gift was making them accessible. Hopefully, like his book, this dive gives you a foothold, a way into these big ideas without feeling completely lost.
Yeah, these aren't just dusty old questions. They're alive. They shape how we think, how we live, how our societies function right now.
Absolutely. They are enduring questions.
So maybe a final thought for you to take away and chew on. How do these philosophical explorations, the ones Durant guided us through, resonate in your own life today? What specific pleasures of philosophy might you find if you keep exploring these ideas?
That's something to ponder.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.